by Israel's war. Less than 15% of the fuel trucks that were supposed to arrive in Gaza have been allowed to enter. Unsurprisingly, the cost of the fuel has rocketed. Before the war, a liter of diesel cost $2.40. Now it is $11.30. And that is, of course, only if you can find a functioning vehicle to put the fuel into.
We're facing a major problem with the roads. Most streets are destroyed or heavily damaged, and the army has bombed much of the infrastructure. Cars don't move like they used to. Ours keep breaking down, and spare parts are expensive. We simply can't keep up with the situation.
The transport crisis is straining family ties. Travel between different areas of Gaza is so difficult that relatives are often scattered and separated.
Traveling to the south means waking up at 5 a.m. just to reach southern Gaza by 10 a.m. I don't even know how I'll visit my aunts for iftar during Ramadan.
Getting from one place to another in Gaza has become a daily struggle. Roads that once took minutes to cross now take hours, with most streets damaged and fuel in short supply. Transportation is no longer a service. It is an exhausting and costly challenge that tests patience, health, and even the ability of families to reunite. Muad al-Kahlout, Al Jazeera, from northern Gaza, Palestine.
In Democratic Republic of Congo, drone attacks have killed at least 3 people, including a UN humanitarian worker. 2 separate strikes were reported in Goma in eastern DRC. One of them took place near the residence of former President Joseph Kabila. The Rwanda-backed M23 rebels, who took control of the city a year ago, have accused government forces of the attack. Fighting has intensified in the region despite a ceasefire. Tensions are rising again in northern Ethiopia, raising fears of another war in the Tigray region just 3 years after a devastating conflict killed hundreds of thousands of people. Residents say banks are running out of cash, basic supplies are scarce, and federal forces are once again deploying near the region's borders. Many civilians are now leaving the regional capital, Mekelle, fearing the fragile peace could collapse. Catherine Soy reports.
People from Ethiopia's Tigray region are leaving the capital, Mekelle, by whatever means they can. Some say they're escaping the possibility of renewed fighting between armed groups, the government, and forces from Eritrea on Tigray's border.
We are really scared. During the last war, I was pregnant. I had to flee from here to Mekone. I suffered a lot during delivery. All that suffering had passed and we returned here.
At the northern border with Eritrea, banks are running out of cash and basic supplies are scarce. Everyone remembers the last conflict. Starting in 2020, Ethiopian government forces fought alongside soldiers in Eritrea to contain the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF. All sides have been accused of human rights abuses.
Many civilians died here, not only those who went to fight. Civilians who stayed behind also died. This is why people are now leaving their property behind and fleeing.
By the time it ended 2 years later, more than 600,000 people had been killed and many more displaced. About 150 kilometers south of Mekelle, the scars of that war remain. The town of Chercher borders Amhara region. People here are not just worried about tensions with Eritrea, but ongoing conflicts between armed groups at the border with Tigray.
I don't know for certain if war is coming, but from what people are saying, I think war is inevitable. We feel very close to disaster. I don't know what to do.
Analysts say what's happening between Eritrea and Ethiopia is partly over access to the Red Sea. When Eritrea declared independence from Ethiopia in 1993, Ethiopia lost direct access to the sea, and relations have been strained ever since. All this as Ethiopia is preparing for elections in May, and people in Tigray are calling on all sides to de-escalate before fighting erupts again. Catherine Soy, Al Jazeera.
It's 0400 GMT. This is Al Jazeera with our continuing coverage of the ongoing conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom with the latest developments. Iraq shuts down oil port operations after 2 foreign oil tankers are attacked in another escalation of the Middle East conflict. Israel's latest strikes on Beirut kill at least 8 people. A prominent seafront neighborhood is targeted. It follows large-scale airstrikes on Beirut's southern suburbs. More than 630 people have been killed by Israeli attacks in Lebanon. Offensive on northern Israel. Hezbollah and Iran carried out a wave of coordinated attacks. And the UN Security Council adopts a resolution condemning Iran's attacks on Gulf countries and Jordan. Iraq has suspended operations at its oil ports after 2 foreign fuel tankers were attacked in the southern port of Al-Faw. It comes as the escalating conflict in the Middle East enters its 13th day. Officials say Iran was behind the strike. At least 1 crew member was killed, while another 25 were rescued. And in Lebanon, at least 8 people have been killed in an Israeli attack on a popular beachfront district in Beirut. More than 30 people were injured in the strike on Ramlat al-Bayda. The Lebanese capital has been under another night of heavy Israeli bombardment. 600 people have been killed and thousands displaced since hostilities resumed between Hezbollah and Israel 11 days ago. Earlier, Israel was the target of a coordinated attack by Hezbollah and Iran. Tehran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps confirmed it was the first joint attack since the start of the war on Iran. Across Israel, strikes and interceptions were reported in several locations. All right, we have correspondents covering developments from Washington, D.C., Tehran, Doha, Amman, and Seoul. But first, let's begin with Heidi Pett in Beirut. Heidi, we know that Beirut's been coming under an increasing number of attacks by Israel. Earlier, you were at the scene of that strike in the Ramlat al-Bayda. That's a popular beachfront district. Just bring us up to speed with all the latest. What did you see when you were there? What did you hear from the people there who've been impacted?
So when we arrived on the scene, first responders and the army were already there, and they had taken away a number of injured people and people who had been killed in that strike as well. The latest numbers that we have from the Ministry of Health is that 8 people were killed and 31 people wounded in what appears to have been another attempted Israeli assassination strike. We've seen a number of those on the capital over the last couple of days. This is the 4th one. And when we talk about a targeted assassination strike, you know, we sometimes use language like precision strike or indeed targeted. But I think the number of people who were wounded and the number of people who were killed in this strike gives you some indication of how wide the impact these can be. They're different, of course, to the large airstrikes, which we have seen, you know, over the capital just in the last 6 hours overnight. There were a number of enormous strikes which hit the southern suburbs. You can see the dawn behind me. The capital is wreathed in smoke. There is a blue sky above me, but the skyline over Beirut looks
It's quite interesting.
Two tankers were full of crude oil from the Iraqi port of Qasr in southern Iraq, and they're sailing on their way across the Gulf towards the Strait of Hormuz. This comes, of course, as you know, after Iran has been threatening to target oil tankers approaching the Strait of Hormuz. But the Iraqi officials say this is a flagrant violation of Iraq's sovereignty, given the fact that this act of, as they say, act of sabotage has happened in Iraq's territorial water. And the SOMO is the national oil firm here in Iraq, says that such attacks threaten the safety, the maritime safety, and also it's affecting Iraq's economy and oil production. As you know, that as a result of this, the oil operations have been halted in southern Iraq, and also this is a huge blow to Iraq's economy, which is already overstretched. As you know, that Iraq relies on about more than 90% of its budget from oil revenues, and it has decreased its oil production from 3,300,000 barrels a day to 1 million barrels a day.
The spokesman for Iran's army says its attacks have caused extensive damage to U.S. bases across the region.
A large number of U.S. forces were killed and injured in American bases in Kuwait. The infrastructure in Salman Harbor, the headquarters of the 5th Fleet in Bahrain, was attacked by missiles and drones. American posts and batteries were hit by our missiles at the Mohammed Al-Ahmad military location. And moments ago, Wave 39 was conducted and U.S. bases were targeted in Persian Gulf. We have also targeted an Israeli ship while it was stationed. The Hormuz Strait is under constant surveillance by our naval forces, and our enemies have no right to pass through.
All right, Mohammed Val is live for us from Tehran, the Iranian capital. Mohammed, let me ask you first to please bring us up to speed with all the latest developments when it comes to the attacks that the U.S. and Israel have been conducting on Iran.
Mohammed, I can say that this was probably the calmest night in Tehran. I'm talking about the night. Yesterday there were bombardments across Tehran, particularly. A strange development there is they began to pound security checkpoints in the streets. So that's a new development yesterday, but overnight it was calm. However, other cities like Isfahan, there was a big blast overnight in Isfahan. There was also Mariban in the west and Ahwaz. So strikes in other cities, more than in Tehran, but they are continuous. And we have news of also an industrial zone south of Tehran that has been hit overnight. Several industrial complexes there and villages have been targeted overnight. So that's the overall picture of what's happening here in Iran, but not as intense, particularly in Tehran, as before.
Mohammed, let me also just check in with you about a post on the social media site X from Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, in which he talked about potential conditions to end the war, as I understand it. What more can you tell us about that?
Yes, Pezeshkian has had phone calls with the Russian President Vladimir Putin and also with the Pakistani Prime Minister yesterday, and he tweeted after that he had expressed Iran's desire to participate in the peace in the region, and also like intentions of Iran towards peace in the region and its commitments to that, but also for Iran to be able to move ahead or to move away from the present conflict. It has to be, three conditions have to be met, and those include guarantees for non-repetition of aggression on Iran, reparations for the destruction that happened against Iran over the last 12 days, and also respect of Iran's sovereignty like any other country. So those are three conditions for Iran, and it is a gesture. Again, the president here is the only voice right now remaining, talking about peace, talking about reconciliation, and calling regional neighbors to reassure them that Iran is not going to the direction of, out-and-out war or hostility towards them. And he's surrounded only by war hawks, people who are talking only about, even including the foreign minister, Iranians are talking mostly about war as the only solution because they express a lot of frustration regarding the international community, comparing what happened yesterday, that decision that condemns Iran with a lot of countries on board, and the lack of something like that when Iran was attacked on the day one of this war and its leadership was decapitated. In a normal circumstance, a normal country should have received a lot of support after such incidents like the decapitation of the leadership and aggression by other countries that was not invited by the country itself. That's how they express it here, double standards. And that's why they are losing faith, they say, in negotiations and losing faith in mediation. And they have zero trust towards the Americans and the Israelis once those countries express a kind of desire to go to the negotiation table. That's the situation in Iran. Everybody talking about war as the only solution, military power as the only thing Iran should resort to in order to enforce its rights and get what it needs from this conflict.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Mohammed Val live for us in the Iranian capital, Tehran. Thanks so much, Mohammed. Let's turn now to Rory Challens, who's joining us from the Jordanian capital, Amman, with all the latest developments in Israel. So, Rory, I was just speaking to Mohammed Val, who is there in Tehran, about the latest Israeli strikes on Iran. Let me ask you, there's been another round of missiles fired on Israel, not just from Iran, but also from Lebanon. So what more can you tell us about all those developments?
There have been two coordinated attacks on Israel overnight, coordination between Hezbollah and Iran. The first one came at the beginning of the evening, and the second one an hour or so before dawn. The first one, the early one, was particularly intense. 100 or so rockets fired by Hezbollah over the border from Lebanon at the same time that Iran was firing missiles as well. And the second one, a little bit less intense, but there have been continuous strikes overnight, or at least attempted strikes. There has been damage. We know that. One of the mayors of an Israeli town called Emek Hefer, which is north of Tel Aviv, talked about a rocket from Lebanon hitting a house there and causing damage to other houses in the area. But in the main, the Israelis are very tight about how much information comes out and what we know about damage here, damage there, what's caused what, etc. They're very good at saying, well, we shot the Iranian missiles down, less forthcoming when it comes to what's been damaged or hit on the ground. And that's because Israel has a very, very tight military censor at the moment in the course of this war. They want to keep very restricted information coming out. Only information that they have cleared is put into the public domain. So if someone films a video of a strike site, then they can be prosecuted if they put it out on social media, etc. What we do know is that Israel has hit back hard against Hezbollah. It has struck parts of southern Beirut, lots and lots of airstrikes there overnight. And the Israelis have been talking about expanding their operation into Lebanon. We know that soldiers are on the ground there trying to create this buffer zone between the northern border and where Hezbollah can operate. Benjamin Netanyahu's been in security briefings, and the Israeli media has also been talking about how warnings are being put out from the Israeli government through Western intermediaries like the United States, etc., to tell the Lebanese government, look, you better get a rein in on Hezbollah, you better control Hezbollah, and if you can't do that, then it's perhaps government buildings in Lebanon that are going to be hit next.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Rory Challens joining us with all the latest from Amman. Thanks so much, Rory. A drone has crashed into a residential tower in Dubai. A minor fire broke out in the building in the Creek Harbor district. Authorities say no one was injured. It was one of several attacks on the UAE on Wednesday, including a drone strike near Dubai's international airport. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian has spoken with the Sultan of Oman after drones struck oil storage facilities in the port of Salalah. Sultan Haytham bin Tariq condemned the attack. Pezeshkian told him the incident will be investigated. Salala's port has become an increasingly important hub for tankers seeking to bypass the Strait of Hormuz. Qatar's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Mohammed bin Abdurrahman Al Thani has addressed Qatar's Council of Ministers, urging resilience in the face of Iranian attacks.
We meet today as our region is going through grave circumstances due to the ongoing military escalation that has affected the region and has also targeted the state of Qatar, regrettably, with repeated attacks from Iran, which have not been limited to military targets alone. At this stage, it is important to recognize the significance of the moment our country is going through. Qatar has faced many difficult challenges in recent years, and each time, by the grace of God, we have emerged stronger. Such experiences have taught us the importance of perseverance and the need to continue strengthening the resilience of our country in the face of such challenges. Therefore, under the current political and economic circumstances, I urge you all to prioritize spending in ways that strengthen our resilience. And when this hardship passes, God willing, we must maintain this same level of commitment.
All right, let's speak now to Victoria Gatenby, who joins us live from here in Doha. So, Victoria, in the last several hours, there were 2 oil tankers that were attacked off the coast of Iraq. There have also been similar attacks on ports in Oman and Bahrain. Tankers near the Strait of Hormuz were also targeted. How much concern is there when it comes to the fact that energy infrastructure is increasingly being targeted in the region now?
Well, this region's economy is built on its energy sector, so there is enormous concern throughout the region, really, that its energy infrastructure is being targeted by the Iranians consistently now. In Bahrain, the Ministry of Interior has confirmed that fuel tankers in the port city of Muharraq was targeted in the early hours of this morning. They say that those tankers were on fire, huge plumes of smoke could be seen. And fuel tankers were also targeted in the port city of Salalah in Oman, as you just mentioned. That prompted an emergency call from the Sultan of Oman to the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, in which the Sultan condemned those attacks on his country. Pezeshkian said that they would be investigated, and he said that Iran was only really targeting US military assets in GCC countries. But we know from what the Qatari Prime Minister, Foreign Minister has said, that's a line that the GCC countries are pushing back on hard. Mohammed bin Abdulrahman bin Jassim Al Thani has said that there is evidence here in Doha that civilian areas and civilian infrastructure have been targeted by the Iranians over the last few days. Elsewhere in the Strait of Hormuz, the IRGC said they targeted 2 cargo ships trying to get through the Strait of Hormuz. One was a Thai-flagged cargo ship that was targeted by a drone. It started a fire. 3 crew members are still missing. 20 had to be rescued by the Omani Coast Guard. And after that attack, the IRGC issued a statement that said that all ships trying to pass through that very narrow waterway, crucial waterway, would now have to seek permission from Iran in order to be able to pass. And they said that the Americans and their allies would not be allowed safe passage.
And of course, Victoria, it's important to highlight the fact that it's not just energy infrastructure sites, not just oil ports that have been impacted by these attacks coming from Iran. There have been increasingly civilian targets that have been hit from Iran these past several days. Just bring us up to speed on what's been happening in other Gulf countries.
Yeah, that's correct. So in Saudi Arabia in the last few hours, their Ministry of Defense has said a drone has been intercepted in the diplomatic quarter in Riyadh. Staying in Saudi Arabia, the Sheba oil field in the southeast of the country, very close to the border with the UAE, has been relentlessly targeted over the last few days. In the last couple of hours, the Ministry of Defense there has said it's intercepted 9 drones trying to target that Aramco oil field. Again, it normally produces around 1 million barrels a day. So another example of the Iranians trying to target the energy infrastructure in this region. So despite what GCC countries have been asking for, a de-escalation, a return to dialogue, it seems the Iranians are continuing to target energy infrastructure, civilian areas, and U.S. military assets.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Victoria Gatenby live for us from here in Doha. Thanks so much, Victoria. U.S. President Donald Trump has urged oil tankers to pass through the Strait of Hormuz as Iran tightens its chokehold on the crucial maritime route. Trump promised safe passage for the vessels, but did not provide details. A fifth of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas trade passes through the strait. The U.S. president also said the operation against Iran is not over yet. Iran says it's ready for a long war of attrition.
then Sushi is still lead with the warm.
Latest messaging about the war in Iran is still very vague.
Yeah, it's been very interesting. He's speaking in broad platitudes that we're really hitting them like never before and that we need to finish the mission. It's a very mixed message because on the one hand, yes, the United States is continuing to conduct airstrikes over Iran and dealing with a number of other threats. But I keep wondering what he means by finish the job, because if that includes a regime change, I think it's going to be very difficult to achieve here without a significant escalation of U.S. effort, and would go against his little excursion phrase that he keeps referring this to by. Well, I think both in rhetoric and action, things do appear to be escalatory on both sides. Now, in terms of what the conditions that Iran is putting forward are to Russia and Pakistan, that remains to be seen. And it's somewhat encouraging to hear that there's at least mention of this, which we have not heard over the last few days. The big question becomes, what is the U.S. reaction going to be to it, and what kind of agreement might they be willing to live with, given the more of the maximalist stances the U.S. has taken when it comes to the nuclear program, the ballistic missiles, proxies, and other things.
You're watching Al Jazeera's continuing coverage of the ongoing conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. Here's a reminder of all the latest developments. Iraq has suspended operations at its oil ports after 2 foreign fuel tankers were attacked in the southern port of Al-Faw. Officials say Iran was behind the strike. At least 1 crew member was killed, while another 25 were evacuated. At least 8 people have been killed in an Israeli attack on a popular beachfront district in Beirut. More than 30 people were injured in the strike on Ramlat al-Bayda. The Lebanese capital has come under another night of heavy Israeli bombardment. Meanwhile, Israel was the target of a coordinated attack by Hezbollah and Iran on Wednesday. Tehran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps confirmed it was the first joint attack since the start of the war on Iran. Strikes and interceptions were reported in several locations across the country. The International Energy Agency has agreed to release the largest volume of emergency oil reserves in its history. The Paris-based organization says it will make 400 million barrels of oil available from its members' emergency reserves.
IEA countries have unanimously decided to launch the largest ever release of emergency oil stocks in our agency's history. IEA countries will be making 400 million barrels of oil available. I repeat, 400 million barrels of oil available to the market to offset the supply lost through the effective closure of the strait. This is a major action aiming to alleviate the immediate impacts of the disruption in markets.
Despite that announcement, oil prices have risen this morning in Asia. Efforts to calm investors seem to have been largely undone by attacks on oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. Al Jazeera's Jack Barton now joins us with more details from Seoul. Jack, how are Asian markets reacting so far?
Well, that's right. As oil goes up, as there are more disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz, the markets have generally gone down across Asia, though they are marginal drops. Larger in the countries heavily industrialized with big export economies like Taiwan, Japan and South Korea, but still only around 1%, or in the Nikkei, in Japan's case, around 1.5%. Still the big question here, how long will the war go on? How will it end? What is the long-term impact of these prices going to be? That's why we see these continued nerves as the oil price rises and the transport costs act as an unofficial tax, putting the cost of basics up, like food, like utility bills, which is dampening consumption in these economies, so leading to lower forecasts. The government here is trying to do things. It's put price cap on fuel. It's also released 22 million barrels from its stockpiles into the market as part of that International Energy Agency plan. But we know that 14,000 South Korean companies that have business ties to the Middle East are now seeking government financial aid. And many more which rely on oil-based petrochemicals to drive this industrial economy at the moment are facing imminent closure.
South Korean plastics manufacturer Hwangman-ik inspecting the last bags of raw materials produced from crude oil. Only 1 in 4 workers remain, and all production is about to stop.
Yesterday, I got a phone call saying that suddenly there's a shortage of raw materials, so the raw material provider is no longer shipping them out.
It's a story being told across South Korea after US and Israeli attacks on Iran triggered an energy crisis far beyond the Middle East.
Everything is connected in a chain. So rather than just plastic factories being affected, petrochemicals have ripple effects across the entire industry.
A ripple that affects everything from automobiles and cosmetics to fertilizer and food. All of which are being hit by the additional impact of rising transport costs, leading to inflation, lowered growth forecasts, and a battered Korean won. 70% of South Korea's oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz off the coast of Iran. Tehran's Revolutionary Guard has effectively closed the waterway as part of the war.
It would be advisable to work closely with strategic partner countries to swiftly identify alternative supply routes that do not pass through the Strait of Hormuz.
But alternatives will come at a higher price, and they will arrive too late for many.
The domestic economy is already extremely bad and has already sunk to the bottom. And if on top of that we face destruction of raw material supply, then factories like ours would have difficulty surviving.
Until oil transit returns to normal, all Hwang can do is oversee the final order his company can fill on a machine about to fall silent. Jack Barton, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
Gary Ng is a senior economist for Asia Pacific at Natixis, a French investment bank. He joins us now live from Shanghai. Gary, thanks so much for being with us here on Al Jazeera. Let me ask you first, how do you expect markets across Asia are going to react to all the developments that are going on in the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, indeed, the biggest uncertainty remains in the duration of the war and the blockade of the Strait of the Hormuz. And of course, if we see a solution within the next 2 to 4 weeks, then the ultimate impact may not be as big. But for anything that can be extended beyond 1 month, maybe 3 months, it is possible to have a spillover towards another panic mode in the Asia market. And especially if you look across market, definitely Korea, Japan, those are more exposed to the energy import directly through the Strait of Hormuz, then they are definitely being hit more with more worries. For other countries, there could still be more spillover effect. Therefore, I think the situation is still highly uncertain, and it's hard to say the market will react very positively in the short run.
And Gary, with all that uncertainty, as you mentioned, I mean, we're already seeing countries, or at least some countries, move to strategic reserves. And in some cases, in Southeast Asia specifically, there are even some efforts to limit work in offices simply to be able to conserve on fuel. So what type of impact is all this going to have in the short term?
Well, the ultimate impact is really on growth, because when countries try to restrict the supply, that will affect industrial production and also all the jobs alongside the supply chain. And on the other hand, if you cut supply, then on demand side, obviously for some of the government, they decide to trim demand just to make sure that the energy is being saved and allocated to the most critical industry. So if we have all of this together, it means that it's possible to see basically high inflation across Asia plus weaker demand. This is definitely not a situation that a lot of the Asian markets want to end up, but indeed this is the reality that we are facing.
Gary, how do you expect the potential duration of this war will impact or affect Asian economies and their respective governments when it comes to their efforts to seek long-term solutions in order to plan for contingencies in the energy sector?
Well, I would say in the short run, definitely there could be more subsidies being rolled out at the cost of fiscal debt. And at the same time, for countries who have a reserve, it's possible to see the partial release just to tame the cost a little bit, and hopefully the war will end soon. But in the longer run, it really bad for the countries without sufficient resources or basically the monetary reserves to really buy energy from other countries. Because with a lower supply, then obviously some of the richer countries like Japan, South Korea, or maybe China as well, they will be able to bid on the energy on a higher prices given the limited supply. But for the others, definitely the risk is higher in terms of the inability to secure this sort of supply. So increasingly, such divergence can also create like a different path, I would say, within different economies in Asia. So it is indeed quite a tricky question.
And Gary, of course, we should mention that, oil isn't the only issue that's at play here. Aviation, shipping, other industries, they're also very much impacted right now. How much is all this going to mean for other industries on a broader level?
Well, it is indeed a very, very problematic issue right now. And of course, energy is one thing, but at the same time, if we continue to see high cost for shipping, we already know that some of the insurer, they refuse to basically insure the ships going through the Strait of Hormuz. And if there's more rerouting for the aviation industry, especially between the Asia-Europe routes, then it will mean that there could be fewer travelers to Asia, fewer tourism inflows, and basically higher costs for the aviation sector as well. So it is indeed quite bad for the mobility industry in terms of the weaker demand plus higher cost. And of course, the story doesn't really end here. There are also other potential impact towards petrochemical, which is very dependent on the oil-related industry. And even if you think of other sectors like construction, China and Korea has 35% of the construction projects overseas in the Middle East. So what will happen to those projects?
All right, that's Gary Ng, who is a senior economist for Asia Pacific at Natixis. Thanks so much for joining us. Great to get your thoughts. As we mentioned, the UN Security Council has passed a resolution put forward by Gulf Cooperation Council members calling on Iran to halt attacks on Gulf states. Al Jazeera's Gabriel Elizondo reports from New York.
Will those in favor of the draft resolution please raise their hand?
The message to Tehran is clear. Stop attacking your neighboring countries in the Gulf.
The draft resolution has been adopted.
It condemns Iran's attacks on Gulf countries and demands they stop.
The adoption of this resolution today sends a clear message, a united message from the Security Council that missile attacks and drone attacks perpetrated by the Islamic Republic of Iran that targeted a number of regional states, including the Kingdom of Bahrain, are completely rejected and are flagrant violations of the Charter of the United Nations and international law and the principles of good neighborliness.
Before the meeting, Qatar's ambassador said Iran's attacks are illegal.
Let us be clear. These attacks by the Islamic Republic of Iran have targeted our sovereign territory.